Hello, my name is Ana Tona. I'm a PhD student at the University of Toronto, and I'm currently working on semantic frames in Nahuatl. When we speak, we evoke situations or frames that may be culturally specific. For instance, if we mention an act of telling a story, what individuals picture in their heads will be different depending on their world experiences. So a frame is a conceptual system whose individual concepts can only be understood through familiarity with the system as a whole. When a word is used, the entire frame is activated. Knowing a word means knowing the frame to which it pertains, including the elements involved, the relationships or interactions among those elements, and the situations in which the events usually take place. In this framework, frame elements are understood as frame-specific semantic roles. So instead of using labels like agent and patient, we use labels that correspond to the roles in the specific event. The statement frame involves a speaker and addressee, a message or topic, and possibly a medium. Lexical units encode particular perspectives by restricting the expression of certain frame elements. For example, we can use the verb say to report a message as in she said that she is happy now. And we could also use a quote instead, like she said I'm happy now. But we cannot do this with the verb talk because this verb highlights the interaction between interlocutors. The verb talk blocks the message. We cannot say she talked that she is happy now, but we could express the topic by saying something like she talked about her feelings. The syntactic realizations of frame elements may vary, so we try to get all possibilities. So the questions that I wish to answer here are what perspectives are built into Nahuatl speech verbs and how are syntactic functions distributed and marked among frame elements. The elicitation process included a story where a man needs to send a message to a friend, and in the process, the message gets repeated by several people. There was also a sentence translation task and a grammaticality judgment task to see which frame elements would be included or omitted. 16 Nahuatl speakers from 3 different regions in Mexico participated in this study, so many thanks to all of them. In the data that I gathered, the verb irhuia was the most frequently used. Irhuia can be translated into the English verb as tell. Its syntactic configuration highlights the transmission of a message, so speaker, message, and addressee are all important elements. The speaker is coded as the subject with all speech verbs. For Nahuatl, this means it is expressed with an optional noun, phrase, and the obligatory subject prefix, which is null for the third person. The addressee is marked with an object prefix, as any recipient will be. The message can be expressed as a full NP or demonstrative, like in sentence 2, or as a clause that may or may not be introduced by a complementizer, like in sentence 1, which has a clause with a direct quote. It is also possible to introduce a topic using an adposition, like in sentence 2. The verb kiihtoa roughly corresponds to the English verb say, and it was the second most frequent in the corpus. It highlights the message, which can be expressed as a clause or an NP, just like with the verb ilhuia. We have 2 of these forms of expression in sentence 3 with a quote and a demonstrative, and the topic can also be mentioned. Something that is different about this verb is that the addressee is completely blocked. Trying to include the addressee produces an ungrammatical sentence, as we can see here in 5. So if we wish to include the addressee in our sentence, we have to use the verb ilhuia. The last verb that I will present here is motlapoa, which is similar in meaning to the English verbs speak or talk. This lexical unit highlights the interaction, so speaker and addressee are the main elements. The speaker can be expressed with the subject marker as always, but interestingly, it also takes the reflexive marker. Then the addressee is introduced with a preposition meaning with. And in Nahuatl, this preposition is relational, so it takes a possessive prefix. In 6, we see the second person possessive marker. So we could say that this verb expresses an event where the speaker is recounting or telling a story to himself in the company of someone. Another option for the expression of elements is to code both interlocutors together by adding the plural marker to the verb, in which case the reflexive gets a reciprocal meaning. And we can see it in 7. The importance of both parties here is evidenced in the ungrammaticality of sentence 8, where I try to take out the addressee. The data shows a rich set of speech verbs in Nahuatl, but I will limit my presentation to these 3 for time constraints. Besides the perspective imposed by lexical units, speech verbs allow for another kind of perspective, the one the speaker chooses to assume for pragmatic reasons when telling a story or reporting messages. Speakers may use direct speech, repeating the message exactly as produced by the original speaker. So in a direct quote like, "I am happy with him," the first person pronoun refers to the original speaker rather than the current speaker. When speakers report a message using indirect speech, they adapt the message to the current speaker's perspective through a shift in personal, temporal, or spatial deixis. And there can also be other markers like complementizers or quotatives. Sentence 10 here is the adapted version of 9, with the complementizer introducing the clause containing the reported message and a person shift on the verb. Another option is to have a mixed strategy or an incomplete shift, like in 11, where there is a quote which is expected to repeat the original message exactly, but there is one little shift in temporal deixis. So with this in mind, my research questions regarding reported speech forms are: which reported speech forms are available in Nahuatl, and where is perspective shift marked? As I mentioned previously, for this study, I used a story of a man sending a message which was repeated by several people. Here we have one example showing how the message was produced by 2 characters. The first one is a request by the original speaker using the imperative marker she, which is only grammatical with second person targets. We also see a directional marker D, meaning we'll go over there to some location away from the speaker. When this addressee passes along the message, it adapts it with a shift in personal deixis by replacing the imperative marker she with ma. Ma is an exhortative marker suitable for expressing desires or requests involving a third person. So this can be interpreted as a shift in person. A shift in spatial deixis is also there. Notice the directional D has been replaced by ki, meaning will come over here at the location where the speaker stands. Here we see another example of personal and spatial deixis. I will go later and speak with her becomes he will come over to speak with you. Again, personal and spatial deixis. And finally, we have an example of a shift in temporal deixis. Here, the speaker decided to tell this part of the story using indirect speech first and then repeated the message using direct speech. And so in the indirect speech form, we see the past imperfective marker yaya, whereas the direct speech form is in the present tense, which goes unmarked for some verbs in Nahuatl. So in this study, I looked at the syntactic configurations of some Nahuatl speech verbs, and I found some interesting features like the blocking of the addressee with the verb quihtoa and the reflexive marker with the verb motlapoa. I also looked at reported speech forms and found there are both direct and indirect forms, and they are observable in markers of person, space, and tense in Nahuatl. And that is all. Thank you for listening.